Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Street. I am a research assistant at the University of Essex. I joined the Essex Business School specifically to work on organizing the Accelerating Women's Enterprise Bootcamp. I'm a PhD student with a specific interest in women entrepreneurs, and my thesis is on female refugee entrepreneurs. I have been an entrepreneur, and my own experiences have definitely shaped the ideas behind the bootcamp. This recording will detail some specifics of the bootcamp from conception to delivery. When we first started to look at the demographic of women who were interested in getting involved in the bootcamp, it varied incredibly, particularly in terms of education. From a woman with a doctorate wanting to start an interior design business to a woman who had 4 years of education and wanted to start a small business selling traditional Afghani food and clothing. How could we make the bootcamp inclusive? How do we use the idea of peer learning and mentorship to inspire and empower all women to be entrepreneurs? Well, initially we sourced 4 women entrepreneurs who were approaching or had traded for 1 year to share their enterprise stories with women who were at the early stages of startup. The understanding that entrepreneurship has a lot to do with self-confidence and empowerment of women became the basis of the bootcamp. And when we selected the facilitators, we chose very carefully. We chose women who were able to articulate their entrepreneurial journey, and their diverse businesses were key to giving a well-rounded view of the entrepreneurial startup process. I think it's important to mention that the facilitators were also participants. They benefit from the network by sharing their experiences with the participants and each other. And in the pre-workshop interviews, they all mentioned a lack of network with other women entrepreneurs in their startup stage and how that would have helped them during those often isolating stages of starting a business. The idea of using facilitators as storytellers helped to eliminate education as a barrier. It allowed the sharing of knowledge in an accessible way, drawing on ideas of oral storytelling. It also built on establishing social capital and the creation of a network of women to support and encourage one another. With the eligibility criteria, that of being a vulnerable woman, I expected maybe a barrier or two when as a woman you're faced with so many barriers like language, political status, education, money, and childcare needs, your entrepreneurial dreams are often way down on the list. And this means that the most vulnerable women in our society are often excluded from access to enterprise or any training thereof, and the assumptions are made that they cannot be agents of change. From the initial conceptual paper, we identified these barriers to both entrepreneurship for women and more specifically barriers to participation in an entrepreneurial bootcamp. The initial interviews showed that women were very keen to participate in the bootcamp, but as the majority of them had small children, they were worried about how they would organize childcare and, in some cases, actually were not prepared to leave their children for 2 days. So the question of how we could run an entrepreneurial bootcamp and encourage vulnerable women to be involved by supporting them to overcome barriers at the same time. So this idea of a bootcamp that had an integrated learning environment evolved. But we asked ourselves how we were going to do this. I'd had a conversation with Anne Forbes, who runs the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme in Ashford. And she spoke about how women in their group who met for educational sessions, whether those be language or skill workshops, often had their children on site and more often in the same room. And she said it worked really well. But I wasn't entirely convinced until I observed an English lesson in which the children were cared for in the same room where their mothers were being taught. It worked, and it became an integral part of our bootcamp design. For the 2 days, we brought a child carer who had a specific interest in play therapy, and she was an integral part of the success of the bootcamp. Whilst the mothers were learning, she organized, facilitated, and constructive play. And at times, there were interruptions. We even had a 5-month-old baby who was passed around. But women and children were engaged. And if you step back to observe it, it was quite phenomenal. Another important aspect when dealing with vulnerable women is that we wanted to make sure that they were in a safe and secure environment, somewhere where they felt they were supported, and we wanted to include health and well-being aspect into the day. So what we did was, between the enterprise storytelling, we interjected mindfulness sessions that were run by a counselor, mentor, coach. And she was available throughout the 2 days for anyone who needed to talk. The bootcamp as a model ran well. After an initial group icebreaker and mindfulness session, the participants were divided into 4 groups, 3 participants with a facilitator. And the groups would move from each facilitator for a different entrepreneurial story, that being topic related, from marketing and social media to finance, business setup. And over the course of the 2 days, each participant would have moved through the stories of the 4 facilitators and 4 mindfulness sessions. We also offered a Q&A legal advice session and an inspiring story by Sarah Mizran, a Libyan women's rights activist. As a pilot study, there were aspects which worked and others that needed reconsidering. The model ensured active engagement and inclusivity. However, there were some knowledge gaps, and the model could do with some extensions. That being the inclusion of a specialist in each of the groups. The facilitator would still tell the story, but the specialist would be there to interject and offer specific advice in order to fill any knowledge gaps that the facilitator had. One of my arguments in terms of this was that a lot of entrepreneurs start their business without having all the answers. And the idea was to present the participants with the facilitators who maybe didn't know everything, but they still started their business. And I think it's important that participants realize that you might not have all the answers before you start, but the whole process of the entrepreneurial startup is very much a learning curve. I think as an initial bootcamp, it would have achieved its objectives. However, 2 days would be restrictive in terms of covering all aspects of entrepreneurship. As an initial confidence building and ideas generation model, but for deeper learning, you would definitely need a specialist in each area. I think this could be easily adopted by our current model. Not all boot camps would require so much childcare. It just so happened that ours did. Obviously, I haven't been able to cover all aspects of the 2-day workshop in this recording, but please feel free to contact Caleb or myself if you'd like a copy of the bootcamp report or have any questions. Thank you very much.